Let's tell you about this now. Only 1/3 of non-executive directors of companies in South Africa currently are female. This is according to a new report released called Status of Gender on JSE Listed Boards 2022. The research undertaken by Business Engage suggests that improvements are being made in seating women at the boards of JSE listed companies. We discussed this further with Jo Pöhl, Senior Advisor at Kearney Africa. Jo, thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. Why is this also important?
Thank you for the opportunity, Dudu, and good afternoon to everyone. I think this is important in terms of it's not only an imperative for doing what's morally correct, but it's also a business imperative. There are a number of cases around why this makes a difference to revenue, to profit, to ESG and sustainability initiatives. So it's important in terms of representing the demographic of our country, the risk of leaving out trillions if you have to look at what the gender diversity gap looks like, and the opportunity to really harness the power of what it means to have a diverse and inclusive leadership structure. And although we've got 1/3 of non-executive directors on boards at the moment being women, we must also recognize that we have come quite far in 5 years. So that's up from just below a quarter. And maybe some other stats around why this is important is we've started to see, of our non-executive or lead independent directors, nearly 3 times what it used to be. So there's definitely a move to understanding why this is relevant, why it is important, and how it can shape business that is sustainable going forward.
That we are seeing an improvement, albeit not at a pace that is ideal. What does that speak to? That we don't have enough women to put in these positions, or we're not fishing enough for women to fit these positions?
It's quite interesting around whether we need to go deeper. We have seen, I think, definitely an increase, for example, in the CFO lanes going from 10% to 22% over the 5-year period. A little less, so it's still single digits for CEOs, and in terms of the non-executive directorships and different committees, we definitely need to push it harder. So there are a couple of reasons. Because the targets are voluntary, there's potentially a risk there. And do we need to legislate to change behavior? Alternatively, it needs to be part of our DNA. So I think there are a couple of things. We had a great panel this morning, and actually CJ Kajenga raised a very valid point around the availability of a woman and the willingness to step up as well, plus confidence. And so to a large degree, it is about digging deeper. It's about creating opportunities for women on boards, whether that's extending the size of boards in terms of my experience, to allow people to step onto them, to learn and to observe and to grow into the roles. There's a great opportunity if we just look at some of the research stats. We can look at it with a positive and a negative lens. Positively, we are trending in the right direction. We are winning. We've definitely not won. Negatively, there are 17 boards with no women. There are 41 boards that don't report at all, and this is only of those that were surveyed. And so to some extent, there's a tick box exercise, and for others, it's ongoing. But if we think about availability, willingness, confidence, and creating space for others, it is about each of us taking accountability to make that difference, whether we're at an individual level and have a seat at the table and can make a voice and use our voice, or whether it is about us as corporate South Africa to make that difference too. So I think there are lots of reasons why it hasn't happened. With board rotation coming up, succession planning, etc., it needs to be deliberate. And to be frank, the stats have oscillated over the last few years. So we have seen positive traction, and this report is an opportunity to pause, to reflect on how much we've gained in the last 5 years. And it has said, I think Deloitte did research that said it takes 5 years to really see the impact of new legislation or proposed initiatives. We are 5 years down the line. The reality is we have to do more. Gender balanced boards make sense, and we're definitely not doing enough. And this type of report is a nudge to act. It's about our actions speaking louder than necessarily our words and our disclosure and making a difference. And I think it's about identifying those women that should be sponsored into the spaces. Because being on a board comes with a level of accountability and responsibility that is important. If you look right and left, the individuals you sit with, take into account the livelihood of their business, sustaining an inanimate object, looking after jobs, reputational risk, etc. Boards play a very pivotal role in terms of contributing to sustainable businesses that are well governed, that can actually, from a longevity perspective, survive and continue gainful employment for a number of individuals. So I think we need to reach deeper. We need to look harder. We need to nudge each other, advocate for each other as women. Men matter as well. We need to pick someone that we can sponsor and be deliberate about not picking an individual to replace you on a board that looks just like you do.
I think when you speak of confidence, it's all about leaning in, as the book suggests. But when we speak of the women who are then in these positions and represented at board level, when they are there, do we know, or does the research talk about how long they stay in the position for and the kind of conditions that they face?
The research hasn't delved into that. It is historical research, and it's not about felt experiences necessarily. I think myself, having sat on a board, we've all faced imposter syndrome. So you sit back and you wonder, am I qualified enough? Should I be here? And I think to some degree we're all an alien somewhere. So the level of preparedness for individuals is important. There have been some interesting theses done by individuals on the felt experience of women on boards and what it means. And sometimes it's lonely. So I think to your point around, what does it feel like in a level of confidence? It's how do we support each other? And in fact, one of the concerns in some of the research is we've got the one and doners. We've got one woman on the board, and yes, you've ticked the box. Possibly, because the research doesn't dig deeply enough, they may have a target of 3 or 4, but are doing that incrementally over time. And as a consequence, I think we don't close the gap enough in terms of supporting other women as they join boards, enabling them. Business Engage, for example, is a wonderful program called the Board Masterclass series that is really practical. A number of experts that sit on boards, and we're part of that program and process. We really work with women. Men actually join the program too, to get them board ready, confident, build out a broader network of individuals that can support them when they are in that role, so that they are geared and they are set up for success. The reason Kearney co-sponsored this research is largely because it's essentially right to do this. And if we tell enough stories of successfully well-governed boards that have reached gender parity or on the trajectory towards reaching what their targets should be, I think we'll foster more stories. We'll create an environment that says this is possible. And I think inherently we must wonder if we're good enough to get there, or if we're too young. And it's interesting, the women on average are 4 to 7 years younger than the men on existing boards, which bodes well for what the future could look like as we see retirements and resignations and a shift. But we're not necessarily too young if you go into the research. And so I think it's about making sure from a credibility perspective, we find someone that will nudge us when we're not sure. And I've seen some incredible women that are sitting on boards where their first gut reaction was, I'm not sure I can. And it takes a drive, potentially, with someone, and a male sponsor in some instances, or a female sponsor, or a good friend, to say, you've got this. And I think if more of us did that, the technical credibility often speaks for itself. Now it's about women picking up meaningful roles in executive or C-suite level. 1 in 4 is one of the recommendations that came out of the research, the Hampton and example, which is either the board chair, the CEO role, the CFO role, etc. One of those 4 should be, ideally, from a female perspective, representing women in a space that says this can be done and is being done successfully with a credible individual.
Jo, I do wonder, in 2022, why are we still holding boards, metaphorically, not literally, saying, bring us on board if you will, right? So do we find that South Africa is the exception to the rule, or is this something that we're seeing broadly all over the world, where female representation, we still have to make noise about being recognized or being brought on board?
I do think that it's grown quite a bit. So if you look at some of the research, initially when they did this in 2011 with Lord Davies, that said 25% they didn't think people would get to. They've exceeded that. 5 years later, when in the UK they had the Hampton Alexander report, the reality they pushed 33, and they're now sitting at an average of 40. No longer does it require commissions. They've now done the FTSE in terms of the women in leadership space for 2022. And I think our actual disclosure around this, our focus is only halfway through that process. We're 5 years in. So we're part of a journey. To be honest with you, what success looks like is when we shouldn't be celebrating breaking through a glass ceiling. We shouldn't be celebrating the first female chair or the first woman CEO in a various industry. That should be the case. If we get this right, and we don't have time to waste and to wait on this, the reality is it will be very different for our daughters and very different for our sons around what the collective will be like in future and how successful they'll be as a collective. Because diversity, whether that is gender, age, a number of lenses, is required to make better business decisions that are more sustainable. And in fact, from an age perspective, we were talking today about if you're in an IT tech disruptor environment in a age is not your prerequisite to the seat at the table. Experience is not necessarily counted in years. It's counted in the type of work you've done. And to be frank, we should be celebrating progress is one thing, but every time we break through a glass ceiling, I feel like we've got backwards, because we shouldn't have those ceilings anymore. And we should be actively telling good news stories where those ceilings were broken long ago, continue to be the case going forward.
Fair point. Jo Pöhl is the Senior Advisor at Kearney Africa. Thank you.